Okay, let's talk about now the key reason why I think a lot of skeptics reject the resurrection. It really comes down to how we try to explain the evidence in the room. Remember, when we look at evidence in any case, we compare a list of evidences to a list of explanations. So let's do that right now when it comes to the resurrection. As an atheist, I would have given you several key pieces of evidence that I believe were true, even though I was not a Christian. And these pieces of evidence really are, I think, rather non-controversial, although I think recently we have seen people try to knock holes even in these basic pieces of evidence. But here they are. I would have said that, yes, Jesus was crucified. He was buried. I was not a Jesus myther. I've done shows here talking about that, so I won't go into the details there. I think you could believe that, though, and not be a Christian. You can explain these facts, this fact, in many other ways without having to embrace any Christian explanation. I also would have said that the tomb was empty and that they never were able to produce the body, because if you want to end this in the first century, you simply get the body of Jesus and drag it around town. The fact that the tomb is empty and that there is no body does not mean Christianity is true. You can believe that even as an atheist, because I could explain that in a number of ways. Maybe somebody stole the body. I could explain it in a number of different ways. The third thing I would say is that the disciples they believed this, and well, even if I didn't say they believed it, I would say they certainly claimed that they saw Jesus risen from the dead. But you could explain that in a number of ways. And even if they did believe it, it doesn't make it true. But people believe all kinds of crazy things. That doesn't mean that these things are true. So I think you can hold these first three positions, and even the fourth, that if you trust what we see in Scripture about kind of the nature of the disciples, it does seem, even without them making a big deal about it, it does seem that they're much bolder after the resurrection than they were before the resurrection. So take a look at those four. I think you could believe those as an atheist. And I did, because these things do not mean Christianity is true. You could explain them a number of other ways, as you see over here. Maybe they were just wrong. Jesus wasn't really dead on that cross, so he didn't really rise from the dead. Maybe they were just lying. Maybe they hallucinated this. Maybe they were fooled by an imposter, or they were influenced by one person who had a vision, who had great influence with the group, or maybe they were late legend. The resurrection didn't actually occur, but it's a legend that grew over time. These are all 6 explanations that you could hold as a non-believer to explain the bare minimum evidence in the room. And of course, there's the last explanation that they're just accurate. This is just the truth about what happened, that the record actually records the truth. Now, I would have said that last one can't be true, but I would have said that the other ones had some good, reasonable possibilities. I mean, some really good explanations. Now, I went through all of them as a skeptic, and I started to look and see, there's just some fatal flaws, really, in any of the first 6 explanations. You could argue that they're just wrong, but I mean, I know enough about what dead people look like. And I talk about this both in my book and in all the videos we've done online. I just can't imagine that someone in the first century would not know that Jesus is actually dead, given the hidden science in the Scripture describing the death of Jesus. I also don't think it's a conspiracy, given what I know about how conspiracies work, how we investigate conspiracies, and what's required for successful conspiracies. This is something else I talk about in Cold Case Christianity. I also didn't think these were hallucinations, given the fact that it's pretty hard to explain detailed group hallucinations where more than one person is reporting the same thing. And I didn't think they were fooled by an imposter, because whoever it is who's after the grave with Jesus, he's working the same kinds of miracles as the Jesus before the grave. You're stuck with a miraculous version of Jesus, and that imposter would have to be divine in order to pull this off. Then if he's divine, you don't need an imposter. And then, of course, you've got the issue of influence, and I went through all of these. Even the idea that these were distorted later by his legends. That requires, if you're going to be a late legend, you need to be both late and a legend. They're neither. They're neither late, and they haven't changed and added a legendary components. That didn't happen over time. So that's the problem we have, is that as you look at all 6 of these explanations, they have fatal flaws. Well, look, I expect that every explanation, even the true explanation, will have both advantages, virtues, and liabilities, right? Good things and bad things. Things that are really great at explaining the evidence, and then some liabilities, some things that don't make any sense. Some weaknesses, strengths and weaknesses. Well, it turns out these have more weaknesses than they have strengths. Now, to get to the last explanation, that's the Christian one. Did Jesus just rise from the dead? I would have said that's got some strengths. It does certainly explain the evidence well, but it's got a huge weakness. It requires me to believe in a resurrection. And that is what keeps most of us from accepting this explanation. I would have said that I don't believe in anything supernatural. So therefore, that is out of the question. But here's my problem. What we're examining when we're examining the resurrection is whether or not supernatural events like the resurrection are reasonable. In other words, this is the focus of our investigation. You cannot begin this investigation by rejecting the supernatural outright. That's what you're investigating. You got to at least suspend your disbelief. Well, here's the problem, though. If you don't suspend your disbelief, I can show you some evidence to support the reliability of the Scripture, maybe how early they were written. You're going to find a way to jump over that because you're committed to your philosophical naturalism. You reject miracles. Well, then I can show you maybe how often they're written about, these accounts, by outside sources. I don't care. I reject miracles. This can't be true. I could show you how archaeological discoveries support the Scriptures. You're going to say, I don't care. I'll find a way to jump over that. And no matter what I show you, you will continue to find ways to jump over all the evidence in front of you because you're committed to this conclusion that supernaturalism is not reasonable. And the reason why you're committed to that is because that's where you began, with the assumption that supernaturalism is not possible. That, my friends, is called circular reasoning, where you start with your conclusion and you find a way to get back to it again. That is not fair, and that's not a good way to conduct investigations. So when it comes down to the resurrection of Jesus, it's one of two things. Either Jesus rose from the dead, or he didn't, when you're asking what happened to Jesus. Okay, so we got to look at both of these possibilities. If you're asking me to accept all kinds of evidence, including the supernatural explanations for that evidence, I would have said, I'm out, because I have a roadblock in my way called my disbelief about anything supernatural. But here's the problem. All the naturalistic explanations that I offered, that anyone's ever offered, are all fatally flawed. These are huge roadblocks. I didn't care, though. I would find a way to jump over these. I'll find a way to go under these, find a way to go around these, because I was committed to that end, that Jesus did not rise from the dead. Even though every explanation that might explain the evidence is fatally flawed. Well, it turns out there's a roadblock over here, but unlike these, I'm the only reason why it's there. I can't control how bad these fatal flaws are, but the only reason why this stands in my path is me. So I could simply remove it. And if I removed it, there would be no roadblock. This would be by far be the most reasonable inference from evidence. I was the reason why I rejected that. So in the end, I was able to get here once I realized I was the only thing keeping me from there. So as you talk to your friends during this season or any time of the year, making the case for the most important piece of evidence in the Christian worldview, keep in mind that sometimes the only real obstacle is the person you're talking to. So help them to see the problem with their presuppositions. That being said, I hope this helps you make the case for what you believe as a Christian, and I'll see you right here next time at Cold Case Christianity.